They laughed when I clutched that $900 bonus check like it mattered. By morning, their $47 million contract was terminated by me. I didn't say a word when they humiliated me in front of the whole floor, but I made sure the last word had my name on the contract they lost. 6 years of dedication reduced to a joke, a pittance, a public spectacle. They thought I'd just smile and take it. They were right about the smile. My name is Rachel Merritt, and I've been invisible for 6 years. The fourth-floor conference room at Virexon Technologies had never felt smaller than it did that December afternoon. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the faces of my colleagues, people I'd worked alongside, shared coffee with, stayed late debugging code for. Now they all stared at me with a mixture of pity and amusement as Eric Sloan, our new department head, held up the envelope containing my quarterly bonus. "And for our data analyst extraordinaire," Eric announced, his voice dripping with mock enthusiasm, "a special recognition bonus of $900. The room fell silent. Someone coughed. I heard Sarah from accounting whisper to her neighbor, though not quietly enough. She should be grateful. That's more than she deserves. I sat frozen in my ergonomic chair, the one I'd occupied for 2,190 days, give or take. My hands remained folded in my lap as Eric walked over. That practiced smile plastered across his face. He'd been here 3 months, and he was handing me an envelope that felt like a slap disguised as a handshake. "Great quarter, Rachel," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Keep up the adequate work." Adequate. The word hung in the air like smoke from a fire no one wanted to acknowledge. I forced my lips into something resembling a smile and accepted the envelope. My fingers didn't shake. I'd learned long ago that showing emotion in this room was like bleeding in shark-infested waters. Minutes earlier, they'd presented Marcus Chen of Marcus Chenson with a $10,000 bonus for his innovative thinking on the Patterson Analytics integration. I'd written 70% of that code, the algorithm that made the whole system run mine, the sleepless nights debugging the neural network protocols mine, but Marcus had presented it, and in this world, the presenter owns the work. "Thank you," I heard myself say, my voice steady as a flatline. "I appreciate the recognition." Eric had already moved on, announcing the next quarter's targets. I tucked the envelope into my blazer pocket and kept my eyes on the PowerPoint slides, each bullet point burning into my retina. Cost reduction strategies, efficiency metrics, team synergy initiatives, corporate speak for do more with less and don't complain. The meeting dragged on for another 47 minutes. I counted. I always count when I'm trying not to scream. When it finally ended, I gathered my laptop and notebook with mechanical precision. No rush, no visible anger, just Rachel being Rachel reliable. Quiet, overlooked. "Hey, Rach?" Marcus caught up with me in the hallway, his designer shoes clicking against the polished floor. "No hard feelings about the bonus thing, right? You know how it is. Optics and all that." Optics, another word for theft dressed up in business casual. "Of course," I said, meeting his eyes. "Congratulations on your recognition." He shifted uncomfortably, perhaps hearing something in my tone that my face didn't betray. "Team effort, really. Couldn't have done it without your input." Input, not work, not expertise. Not the 16-hour days I'd spent perfecting the compression algorithms while he attended networking events and lunch meetings. Input. "I should get back to my desk," I said. "The Mitchell report won't analyze itself." I walked away before he could respond, my heels marking a steady rhythm against the floor. Behind me, I heard him join a group heading to happy hour, a celebration I hadn't been invited to. Not that I would have gone. I had more important things to do than toast to my own erasure. At my desk, I slipped the envelope into my drawer without opening it. I already knew what was inside. $900 before taxes, maybe $650 after. A month's worth of the student loans I was still paying off from the master's degree that was supposed to guarantee me a seat at the table. Not a spot in the corner where they kept the workhorses. My computer screen flickered to life, displaying lines of code that told a different story than the one being celebrated down the hall. Hidden in the comments, time-stamped and tagged with my digital signature, was the real history of who built what. But nobody reads the comments, nobody except lawyers. I smiled, then a real smile, small and private. They thought they knew who I was, the quiet one, the pushover, the grateful recipient of their table scraps. They had no idea who they were dealing with. I didn't go home that night. Instead, I sat at my desk as the office emptied, watching the Austin skyline darken through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The cleaning crew moved around me like I was furniture, which wasn't far from how management saw me anyway. Just another workstation, outputting results on command. The envelope remained untouched in my drawer. Opening it would make it real, and I wasn't ready for that particular humiliation to fully register. Not yet. My fingers moved across the keyboard with practiced precision, but I wasn't working on the Mitchell report. I was downloading something far more valuable, the final version of our strategic partnership contract with Corvax Industries. $47 million over 5 years. Pending successful deployment of our predictive analytics platform. My platform. Though you wouldn't know it from the signature page. Eric had removed my name from the development team 3 weeks ago. Streamlining communications, he'd called it. Too many cooks in the kitchen. What he meant was too many people who might get credit, especially women who didn't laugh at his golf jokes or attend his after-work bourbon tastings. I pulled up my personal email and typed a single line, "Are you free to talk? I need your advice." The recipient was Linda Marquez, Virexon's former chief legal counsel. Linda had been forced out 8 months ago after she'd raised concerns about intellectual property assignments and employee attribution rights. Management called it early retirement. Linda called it what it was, a silencing. Her response came within minutes. Rosewood Bar, 9:30, back booth. I glanced at the clock. 7:43, enough time to finish what I'd started. The download completed, and I transferred the files to an encrypted drive. Not stealing, I had every right to my own work, but Eric and his boys' club had made it clear that my contributions were better left unacknowledged. Fine, let them have their version of history. I'd keep the receipts. My phone buzzed. A text from my sister in Dallas. "How did the bonus meeting go? Did they finally recognize your work?" I stared at the screen for a long moment before typing back, "They recognized something." The office was tomb quiet now. I pulled up another document, an old contract addendum from my work with Corvax's European division 2 years ago, back when I was still naive enough to think hard work and talent would speak for themselves. The language was dense, full of legal jargon I'd barely understood at the time, but one section had always stood out, marked with a yellow sticky note Linda had placed there during review. This could be important someday. Keep a copy. Section 14, subsection B. Intellectual property rights and attribution. The module I developed for real-time data analysis. The core engine that made our entire platform valuable was registered under joint ownership. My name, clearly stated, my rights, legally protected, my work, documented and dated. Eric didn't know about this addendum. Neither did Marcus or the rest of the leadership team. It had been filed with Corvax's legal department, not ours, a technicality that Linda had insisted on, despite pushback from management. "Always have a backup plan," she told me, "especially when you're the only woman in the room." I closed the file and locked my computer. The $900 check could wait in that drawer forever for all I cared. I had bigger plans than cashing in their condescension. The elevator down seemed slower than usual, or maybe I was just more aware of every second passing. Each floor marked another step away from who I'd been, the good soldier, the team player, the grateful recipient of whatever scraps they threw my way. In the parking garage, my 5-year-old Honda looked shabby next to the parade of BMWs and Teslas, another reminder of where I ranked in their hierarchy. I slid behind the wheel and allowed myself one moment of pure, undiluted rage. My hands gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles went white. A scream built in my throat, but I swallowed it down. Anger was energy, and energy needed direction. Linda would help me find it. I drove through the Austin traffic, my mind running calculations that had nothing to do with data analysis and everything to do with justice. They thought they'd bought my silence for $900. They thought I'd smile and nod and continue being their invisible architect, building their empires while they took the credit and the bonuses and the promotions. They thought wrong. By the time I pulled into Rosewood's parking lot, I'd made my decision. I wouldn't make a scene. I wouldn't send angry emails or file complaints with HR. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of calling me emotional, difficult, or any of the other adjectives reserved for women who dared to push back. No, I'd do something far more devastating. I'd use their own rules against them. Rosewood Bar was exactly as I remembered it, dimly lit, jazz playing softly through hidden speakers, and populated by people who valued discretion over display. Linda had chosen well. I found her in the back booth, a glass of red wine catching the amber light from the vintage lamp overhead. "Rachel." She stood to embrace me, and I caught a whiff of her signature perfume Chanel. Understated but unmistakable, even in forced retirement. Linda Marquez maintained her standards. "You look like someone who's had an interesting day." I slid into the booth across from her. $900? Interesting. Her eyebrows rose. "That's all?" "My bonus, for the quarter where I built the entire predictive engine for the Corvax deal." I accepted the wine she poured for me. "Marcus got $10,000 for presenting my work." Linda's expression didn't change, but something sharpened in her eyes. Eric Sloane's leadership style. I warned them about him during my exit interview. Apparently, they didn't listen. They never do. She reached into her leather portfolio and withdrew a manila folder. "I've been wondering when you'd call. To be honest, I expected it sooner. I kept thinking things would change. That if I just worked harder, delivered more, you'd finally be seen." Linda's smile was knowing and sad. "I spent 15 years learning that lesson. Some tables aren't meant for us, Rachel, so we build our own." She slid the folder across the table. Inside was a copy of the contract addendum I'd been reviewing earlier, but this version had additional notes in Linda's careful handwriting. Post-it flags marked several sections. "Tell me," she said, leaning back, "what do you know about the attribution clause in your Corvax agreement?" "I know my name is on it as co-owner of the core analytical module." "Co-owner is underselling it." Linda flipped to a highlighted section. "You're the sole owner of the predictive modeling algorithm, the heart of the entire system. Virexin has usage rights, but those rights are conditional." My pulse quickened. "Conditional on what?" "On your continued involvement in any major implementation or modification. Section 14.b, paragraph 3. She tapped the relevant text. "If the owner is excluded from strategic decisions regarding the module's deployment for a period exceeding 6 months, usage rights revert to the owner." I read the paragraph 3 times, each word sinking in like stones in still water. Eric removed me from the Corvax team 3 weeks ago. But when did he actually start excluding you from decisions? I thought back, calculating. The first meeting I wasn't invited to was in June. He said it was just preliminary discussions, nothing technical. Linda smiled, and it wasn't a nice smile. 7 months ago, well past the 6-month threshold. The implications crashed over me like a wave. Without my module, the Corvax contract was worthless. The entire platform depended on my algorithm to function. It would be like trying to run a car without an engine all show. No substance. "They don't know about this clause," I said. "Of course they don't. It's buried in subsection C of the European addendum. Eric's too arrogant to read the fine print, especially on old contracts, and the only copies are with Corvax's legal team and..." She gestured to the folder. "My personal files." "Is it enforceable?" Linda's smile widened. "I wrote it myself. It's ironclad. The question is, what do you want to do with it?" I stared at the contract, seeing not just legal text but years of late nights, skipped vacations, and silenced contributions. Every line of code I'd written while they discussed golf. Every bug I'd fixed while they took client dinners. Every innovation I'd created while they collected bonuses. "I want what's mine," I said quietly. Linda signaled the bartender for another bottle. "Then we'll need to move carefully. First, you'll need representation. I can recommend someone who specializes in intellectual property disputes. Second, we need to document everything. Every email where Eric excluded you, every meeting you weren't invited to, every decision made without your input. I've been keeping records." "Of course you have." She poured us both fresh glasses. "The beautiful thing about this clause is that you don't need to prove malicious intent. Simple exclusion is enough, and once you exercise your rights..." Virexin loses their core technology right before the biggest deal in company history. Exactly. But here's where it gets interesting. Linda pulled out another document. There's nothing in your employment contract that prevents you from licensing your technology to other companies, including Virexon's competitors. The jazz piano in the background seemed to sync with my heartbeat. Teralogix has been trying to poach me for 2 years. And they'd pay handsomely for exclusive rights to your algorithm, market rate for something like this. She made a few notes on a napkin. 40 to 50 million, minimum. Maybe more if you structure it right. I thought about Eric's smirk as he handed me that envelope. Sarah's whispered judgment. Marcus's fake sympathy in the hallway. $900 for my silence, my compliance, my continued invisibility. When can we start? I asked. Linda raised her glass. How about right now? We spent the next 2 hours mapping out the strategy. By the time I left Rosewood, the city lights blurring through my windshield, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Power. They'd given me $900 and thought they'd bought my soul. They were about to learn how badly they'd miscalculated. The law offices of Hartman and Associates occupied the 17th floor of a downtown Austin high-rise, all glass and steel and carefully cultivated intimidation. Linda had made the introduction, and now I sat across from Diane Hartman herself, a woman whose reputation for dismantling corporate IP theft was legendary in Texas tech circles. Ms. Merritt, Diane said, reviewing the documents spread across her mahogany desk. This is one of the cleanest cases I've seen in 20 years of practice. She held up the Korvax addendum like a winning lottery ticket. Your former colleague, Ms. Marquez, did exceptional work here. So it's enforceable. Enforceable. Diane actually laughed. This is a work of art. The language is precise. The conditions are clear. And Virexon has violated every single provision. The 6-month exclusion period expired 43 days ago. She pulled out a legal pad and began sketching a timeline. Here's how this plays out. Today is Thursday. We file the termination notice tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. sharp. Per the contract, Virexon has 24 hours to cease all use of your algorithm. What happens if they don't? Then they're in breach, and we can seek immediate injunctive relief. But honestly, she leaned back in her chair. They'll comply. They have to. Using your IP after termination would expose them to criminal charges, not just civil penalties. I watched her draw arrows and boxes, transforming my years of silent suffering into a strategic assault. What about my current employment? Texas is an at-will state. They can fire you, but they can't force you to surrender your intellectual property, and if they terminate you in retaliation, she smiled like a shark. That's a whole different lawsuit. I don't want to sue them for wrongful termination, I said. I just want what's mine. Smart, keep it clean, keep it legal, keep it devastating. Diane pulled up a document on her computer. Now, let's talk about Teralogix. For the next hour, we crafted 2 documents that would change everything. The first was a formal termination of Virexon's usage rights, effective in 24 hours. The language was crisp, professional, and utterly ruthless in its precision. No emotion, no accusation, just facts and contract law. The second document was an exclusive licensing agreement with Teralogix, $45 million over 3 years, with a $7 million signing bonus. Performance incentives could push it to $52 million, more money than I'd see in 3 lifetimes at Virexon. We'll send the termination notice via certified mail and email simultaneously, Diane explained. To Eric Sloan, the CEO, the board of directors, and Korvax's legal team. No one can claim they didn't know. When? Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. I'll file it personally. She paused. Are you prepared for what comes next? This will burn every bridge at Virexon. I thought about 6 years of being overlooked, undervalued, and erased. About watching less qualified men take credit for my work while I smiled and stayed silent. About that $900 check sitting in my desk drawer like a monument to their contempt. Those bridges were already ash, I said. They just didn't know it yet. Diane nodded approvingly. One more thing. Teralogix wants to announce the partnership Monday morning before market open. They're planning a press release about their revolutionary acquisition of next-generation predictive analytics technology. You'll need to be ready for visibility. Visibility. After years in the shadows, the word felt foreign. I'll be ready. I left Diane's office as the sun set over Austin, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. In the elevator, I pulled out my phone and saw 17 missed calls from work, probably wondering why I hadn't submitted the Mitchell report. Let them wonder. Back in my car, I opened my laptop and logged into my personal email. The messages from Terralogix's CEO made my hands shake not with fear, but with the intoxicating realization that everything was about to change. Rachel, we're thrilled about the partnership. Your algorithm is exactly what we've been searching for. When can you start? I typed my response carefully. I'll be available for full engagement starting Monday. Please have your legal team coordinate with Diane Hartman for the formal agreement. Send. 20 minutes later, while stuck in traffic on Mopac, my phone rang. Linda. Diane just called me, she said without preamble. Everything's in motion. How are you feeling? Like I'm about to jump off a cliff. You're not jumping, Rachel. You're flying. There's a difference. I thought about tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., when those letters would land on Eric's desk, when the CEO would realize their flagship product was about to become worthless, when Marcus would understand that his $10,000 bonus was built on technology he no longer had access to. Linda, I said, thank you for keeping that contract, for believing this day would come. I didn't do it for you, she replied. I did it for every woman who's ever been told she should be grateful for scraps. Make them regret it. Rachel, make them regret every single dollar they thought you weren't worth. The traffic began to move, and I accelerated into the evening. Leaving downtown behind, tomorrow, Virexon would wake up to a new reality, one where their quiet, overlooked analyst held all the cards. Tonight, though, I had one more thing to do. I drove home, poured myself a glass of wine, and pulled out that $900 check. I didn't cash it. Instead, I took a photo and saved it to a folder labeled Motivation. Someday, when I was standing on a stage somewhere, accepting an award or giving a keynote, I'd tell this story. I'd show them that check and explain how they'd valued my worth at $900. And then I'd tell them how much it cost them to be wrong. Friday morning arrived with unusual clarity. I walked into Virexon at 8:45 a.m., 15 minutes before the termination notice would be delivered. The office hummed with its usual energy developers arguing about framework choices, sales teams celebrating small wins, the coffee machine working overtime. Nobody knew that in 15 minutes, their world would tilt off its axis. I settled at my desk, opened my laptop, and began working on the Mitchell report as if nothing had changed. Normal Rachel, doing normal things, invisible and reliable. At 9:07 a.m., Eric's assistant rushed past my desk, her heels clicking frantically against the floor. 2 minutes later, I heard Eric's voice boom from his corner office. What do you mean? Terminated. The dominoes had begun to fall. By 9:20 a.m., a crowd had gathered outside the main conference room. Through the glass walls, I could see Eric, the CEO, Robert Morrison, and our head of legal, James Park, huddled around a speakerphone. Even from my desk, I could read the panic in their body language. Marcus appeared at my cubicle, his usually perfect hair slightly disheveled. Rachel, weird question, do you have the login credentials for the Corvax testing environment? Why, I kept my eyes on my screen. The whole system just locked up, some kind of licensing error. Eric's freaking out because we're supposed to demo for the Corvax team at 2 p.m. I turned to face him, letting concern creep into my expression. That's strange. I haven't touched it since Eric removed me from the project. Yeah, about that. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. Look, we really need your help here. Can you take a look? I'd love to help, I said slowly. But Eric was very clear that I'm not part of the Corvax team anymore. I wouldn't want to overstep. The color drained from his face. This is serious. Rachel, the entire platform is down. Then you should probably talk to Eric. He practically ran back to the conference room. I returned to my Mitchell report, typing steadily while the chaos escalated around me. By 10 a.m., half the development team was pulled into emergency debugging sessions. By 10:30 a.m., someone from legal was at my desk. Ms. Merritt, James Park's voice was carefully controlled. We need to discuss your work on the predictive analytics module. Of course, I folded my hands in my lap. What would you like to know? Are you aware of any unusual licensing arrangements regarding your contributions? I tilted my head, playing confused. Licensing arrangements. I'm just an analyst. Mr. Park, I write code as part of my job duties. Yes, but specifically regarding the Korvax implementation. The project I was removed from, I let a hint of hurt creep into my voice. I'm sorry, but Eric made it clear I wasn't qualified to be involved in strategic discussions. James's jaw tightened. We need you to come to the conference room, now. I saved my work, locked my computer, and followed him. The walk felt like a funeral procession, his, not mine. The conference room was a battlefield of laptops, legal documents, and barely controlled panic. Eric stood at the whiteboard, where he'd drawn a technical diagram that was almost certainly wrong. Robert Morrison sat at the head of the table, his usually tan face pale and drawn. Rachel? Robert's voice was strained. We've received some concerning communications about intellectual property rights. Can you explain this? Diane Hartman had prepared me for this moment. Stay calm, state facts, let them connect the dots. I developed the predictive analytics module under a joint ownership agreement with Korvax's European division, I said evenly. The agreement includes specific provisions about my involvement in strategic decisions. Nobody told me about any agreement, Eric interjected. I met his gaze steadily. You never asked. You simply removed me from all project communications 7 months ago. That was a management decision. That violated the contract terms. I pulled out my phone and showed them the email trail. Every meeting I wasn't invited to, every decision made without my input, every time you excluded me from my own work. The room fell silent except for the hum of the air conditioning. Robert finally spoke. What do you want? Nothing from Virexon, I replied. I've already licensed the technology to Terralogics. They were very interested in acquiring proven, enterprise-grade analytics capabilities. Terralogics. Eric's face turned an alarming shade of red. Our biggest competitor. Former competitor, I corrected. Without the predictive module, I'm not sure what you'll be competing with. Marcus, who'd been silent until now, suddenly stood. This is sabotage. You can't just... Actually, she can... A new voice cut through the chaos. Diane Hartman stood in the doorway, impeccable in her charcoal suit. I'm Ms. Merritt's attorney. I believe you've received our formal notice. She walked to the table and placed a folder in front of Robert. Cease and desist, effective immediately. Any continued use of Ms. Merritt's intellectual property will result in criminal prosecution. The demo, someone whispered. The Korvax demo is in 3 hours. Then you'd better explain to them why you no longer have the technology you promised, Diane said coolly. I'd also suggest reviewing your SEC filings. I believe you've made several forward-looking statements about capabilities you no longer possess. The implications rippled through the room like a shockwave. Without the module, the Korvax contract was void. Without the contract, their quarterly projections were fantasy. Without the projections, their stock price. The board, Robert muttered, reaching for his phone. I need to call the board. Eric turned to me, his practiced executive composure finally cracking. You did this because of a bonus, because of $900. I stood, gathering my dignity around me like armor. No, Eric, I did this because you thought I was worth $900. Turns out, I'm worth $47 million. The number hung in the air like a judgment. Pack your things, Robert said quietly. You're terminated, effective immediately. I'd expected that. Diane stepped forward. We'll need that in writing, with confirmation that all separation agreements are void given the termination. We'll also need immediate return of all Ms. Merritt's personal property. I walked out of that conference room for the last time, leaving behind 6 years of my life and a group of executives staring at the wreckage of their arrogance. Behind me, I heard someone ask, how do we explain this to Korvax? I didn't stop to hear the answer. I already knew there wasn't one. The neutral conference room at Diane's law firm felt like a demilitarized zone. 1 week had passed since the termination notice, and Virexon's desperation had evolved from panic to barely concealed rage. They'd requested this meeting through their general counsel, promising, a mutually beneficial resolution. I sat beside Diane, reviewing my notes while we waited. The door opened at precisely 3 p.m., and in walked Robert Morrison, Eric Sloan, and two lawyers I didn't recognize. Eric looked like he'd aged 5 years in 7 days. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his usually perfect executive appearance showed cracks, wrinkled shirt, crooked tie, the hollow look of a man watching his career implode. "Ms. Merritt," Robert began without preamble, "we need to find a solution." "There is a solution," Diane responded smoothly. "Your client can stop using my client's intellectual property, as legally required." "You know that's not feasible," one of their lawyers interjected. "The Kovacs deal is no longer Ms. Merritt's concern," Diane cut him off. Eric leaned forward, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles were white. "Rachel, please, you know what this means. The entire Austin office could shut down. That's 300 jobs." I met his gaze without flinching. Interesting how those 300 jobs suddenly matter when your $47 million contract is at risk. "We're prepared to make you a substantial offer," Robert said, pulling out a document. "Full retroactive credit for your work, a senior architect position, and a signing bonus of $250,000. Plus back pay for the promotion you should have received 2 years ago," the second lawyer added. I almost laughed. After years of invisibility, they were finally seeing me, but only because they needed me. No. The word dropped into the room like a stone into still water. "We'll go to 500,000, Robert said quickly, "and a guaranteed seat on the technical advisory board." "No." Eric's control finally snapped. "This is extortion." "No," I said calmly. "Extortion would be illegal. This is consequence." I opened my own folder and withdrew a single sheet of paper. "However, I do have one offer. Terralogics has authorized me to sublicense the technology back to Virexon for specific, limited use in existing contracts only." Their eyes lit up with hope until I continued. "The fee is $30 million for 3 years, non-negotiable, non-exclusive. You'd be licensing from your competitor's partner." The humiliation in Eric's face was almost worth the 6 years of dismissal. Almost. That's more than half the Kovacs contract value," Robert sputtered. "Yes," I agreed. "It is." "You'd rather destroy the company than work with us," Eric demanded. I leaned back in my chair, finally allowing myself the luxury of complete honesty. "Eric, you destroyed any chance of working with me the day you decided I wasn't worth having in the room. You looked at my work, my dedication, my expertise, and you valued it at $900. I stood, gathering my papers. "Now you know what it actually costs." "Wait," Robert called as I reached the door. "We need time to consider the offer, to talk to the board." "You have until Monday at 9 a.m., Diane informed them. "After that, Terralogics proceeds with exclusive development, and you can explain to Kovacs why you sold them vaporware." In the elevator down, Diane turned to me with something like admiration. "You could have asked for more." "It's not about the money," I said. "It's about making them pay it to me. Every month for 3 years. They'll write a check that reminds them of what they threw away." Outside, Austin's heat hit like a physical wall, but I barely noticed. My phone buzzed with a message from the Terralogics CEO. "Heard the meeting went well. Looking forward to Monday's announcement. Your new office is ready whenever you are." A new office, a new title, Chief Analytics Architect, a new company that valued what I built. But first, there was one more meeting to attend. I drove back to Virexon, not to the main entrance, but to the parking garage. Security had revoked my access, but I knew Maria, the garage attendant, would be there until 5 p.m. She'd always been kind, remembering my name when executives couldn't. "Ms. Rachel," she smiled as I approached her booth. "I heard you don't work here no more." "That's right," I said, handing her an envelope. "I wanted to say goodbye, and thank you." She opened it carefully, her eyes widening at the check inside. $10,000. This is too much," she stammered. "No," I said, thinking of another check, another value assigned by those who couldn't see worth. "It's exactly right." As I drove away, I caught a glimpse of the executive floor windows. Somewhere up there, Eric and Robert were probably on emergency calls with board members. trying to explain how they'd lost the technology their future depended on, how their adequate analyst had brought them to their knees with nothing but legal documents and self-respect. My phone rang. "Linda?" "So?" she asked without preamble.
"They'll pay," I said. "They have no choice."
"Good." I could hear her smile. "By the way, I just got a call from a headhunter. Apparently, 3 other companies want to know if you're available for consulting." "Tell them my rate is very reasonable," I said, pulling onto the highway, "as long as they understand my worth." In my rearview mirror, Virexon's building grew smaller, just another glass tower in a city full of them, but I wasn't looking back anymore. I was finally moving forward, at my own price. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crystalline clarity that makes Texas winters worth enduring. I sat in my new corner office at Terralogix, watching the sunrise paint downtown Austin in shades of gold and possibility. My phone hadn't stopped buzzing since 6 a.m. The first message was from a Reuters reporter. "Ms. Merritt, can you comment on Virexon's announcement?" I opened my laptop and navigated to the financial news. The headline made me pause. Virexon Technologies loses 47 million. Corvax contract. Stock plunges 23% in pre-market trading. The article was brutal in its simplicity. Corvax had terminated the partnership effective immediately, citing failure to deliver promised technical capabilities. But it was the subsidiary headlines that told the real story. CEO Robert Morrison steps down after technical licensing dispute. Austin tech giant admits core platform compromised. Terralogix announces revolutionary analytics acquisition. My desk phone rang. "Diane." "They accepted the sub-license agreement," she said without preamble. $30 million over 3 years, first payment due immediately. The check cleared an hour ago. "And Eric?" "Resigned this morning. The board made it a condition of the sub-license approval." She paused. "There's more. Virexon's majority shareholders are calling for a full investigation into how management lost control of critical IP." I swiveled my chair to face the window, watching the city wake up. Somewhere across town, Eric was probably packing his office, trying to figure out how to explain this catastrophe on his resume. The man who'd publicly handed me $900 with a smirk now had to find a new job with this failure hanging around his neck like an albatross. A knock on my door interrupted my thoughts. Jake Morrison, no relation to Robert, stood in the doorway. As Terralogix's CEO, he'd personally overseen my transition. "Ready for the announcement?" he asked. I nodded, following him to the main conference room where a small media setup waited. 3 cameras, a handful of reporters, and a podium with the Terralogix logo. Simple, professional, devastating. Jake spoke first, outlining the acquisition and what it meant for Terralogix's market position. Then he turned to me. "I'd like to introduce our new Chief Analytics Architect, Rachel Merritt, whose groundbreaking work will position Terralogix at the forefront of predictive analytics technology." I stepped to the podium, feeling the weight of every eye in the room. In my hand, I held a small remote for the presentation screen behind me. "Thank you, Jake." I clicked the remote. The screen displayed a single image, a photocopied check for $900. "6 weeks ago," I began, my voice steady and clear, "my former employer valued my contributions at $900. It was a quarterly bonus for work that included developing the core technology now powering Terralogix's next-generation platform." The reporters leaned forward, sensing blood in the water. "I want to be clear, this isn't about revenge. This is about recognition, about ensuring that innovation is valued, that expertise is respected, and that companies understand the true cost of undervaluing their human capital." "Ms. Merritt," a reporter called out, "can you confirm that Virexon lost the Corvax contract because of your intellectual property rights?" "I can confirm that I exercised my legal rights regarding technology I created and owned. The consequences of that were entirely Virexon's to manage." "What would you say to other employees who feel undervalued?" I thought carefully before answering. "Document everything, know your worth, and never accept less than what you deserve." Sometimes the most powerful response to being undervalued isn't to fight, it's to take your value elsewhere. The questions continued for another 20 minutes. I fielded them all with the calm precision I'd once used to debug code at 2 a.m. while executives slept. When it ended, Jake walked me back to my office. That was perfect, he said. Professional but pointed. I learned from the best, I replied, thinking of Linda and Diane and every woman who'd ever been told to be grateful for scraps. My phone buzzed with another message. This time, it was from Marcus. Rachel, I'm sorry. I knew what they were doing was wrong. I should have spoken up. The whole team knows you built everything. We're lost without you. I stared at the message for a long moment before deleting it. Too little, too late. By noon, the financial blogs had picked up the story. The $900 bonus that cost $47 million was trending on LinkedIn. My inbox filled with interview requests, speaking invitations, and job offers from companies suddenly very interested in both my technical skills and my story. But the message that mattered most came at 4:17 p.m. from an address I didn't recognize. Ms. Merritt, I'm a junior developer at a tech company in Seattle. I've been here 2 years, doing senior-level work for entry-level pay. Today, I showed your story to my manager and demanded a review. Thank you for showing me it's possible to know my worth. Sarah C. I printed that email and pinned it to my board, right next to the photo of the $900 check. Outside my window, Austin's skyline glittered in the afternoon sun. Somewhere in that maze of glass and steel, Virexon was conducting emergency meetings, trying to salvage what remained of their reputation. Their stock had closed down 27%, wiping out nearly $1 billion in market value, all because they'd thought I was worth $900. My new assistant knocked and entered. Ms. Merritt, the Wall Street Journal is on line 1. They want to do a feature on tech workers and intellectual property rights. Tell them I'll call back in an hour, I said. I have code to review. Because at the end of the day, that's what this was all about. Not the money or the vindication or the headlines. It was about finally being in a place where my work mattered, where my contributions were valued, where I could build something without worrying that someone would steal the credit and hand me crumbs in return. The great irony was that Virexon could have had it all: my loyalty, my innovation, my dedication for the simple price of respect. Instead, they'd learned the hard way that disrespect has a much higher cost. The Chicago Technology Summit was the kind of event I'd once watched from the live stream, eating a sad desk salad while my supposed superiors networked over champagne. Now, 6 months after the Virexon collapse, I stood backstage at the Hilton, adjusting the microphone pack clipped to my designer blazer. 2 minutes, Ms. Merritt, the stage manager called out. Through a gap in the curtains, I could see the audience: over 3,000 technology leaders, investors, and innovators. In the third row, I spotted several faces from Virexon's former leadership team. They'd come to see the woman who'd brought down their empire with a single legal document. Ladies and gentlemen, the announcer's voice boomed. Please welcome our keynote speaker, Chief Analytics Architect at Terralogix and Time Magazine's Innovator of the Year, Rachel Merritt. The applause washed over me as I walked onto the stage. The lights were blinding, but I'd grown comfortable in the spotlight. It turned out visibility suited me just fine. I approached the podium, waited for the applause to die down, and clicked my presentation remote. Behind me, that familiar image appeared: the $900 check, now blown up to 20 feet tall. This is how little they thought I was worth, I said, my voice carrying clearly through the convention center. Now they're paying $47 million to get back what I built. Silence, complete, electric silence. But this isn't a story about revenge, I continued. It's a story about recognition, about what happens when companies mistake quiet competence for weakness, when they assume that someone who doesn't demand credit doesn't deserve it. I clicked through slides showing the timeline: the years of overlooked contributions, the moment of public humiliation, the legal counterstrike that changed everything. Virexon Technologies lost more than a contract. They lost their future because they couldn't see value sitting right in front of them. They looked at dedication and saw docility. They looked at expertise and saw expendability. They looked at me and saw someone worth $900. I paused, scanning the audience. Every eye was fixed on me. The question you should be asking yourselves isn't whether you have a Rachel Merritt in your organization. You do. The question is, are you paying them $900 while they build your $47 million future? The presentation concluded with a simple slide. Value isn't determined by who speaks loudest, it's determined by who builds what matters. The applause was immediate and thunderous, but I wasn't finished. One last thing, I said as the clapping died down. To every professional who's ever been undervalued, overlooked, or told to be grateful for less than they deserve, document everything. Know your worth, and never, ever let them convince you that their perception of your value is the truth. I left the stage to a standing ovation, but the real victory was in the emails that flooded in over the following days. Stories from developers, analysts, engineers, people who'd found the courage to demand what they deserved because someone had finally shown them it was possible. 3 months later, Vericsson filed for bankruptcy. The sub-license payments to me continued, transferred through the bankruptcy trustees like clockwork. Eric Sloan, according to LinkedIn, had taken a position with a startup in Nebraska. His profile no longer mentioned his time as a department head. Marcus, now working at a mid-tier consulting firm, sent one final message. You were right. We all knew it. I'm sorry it took losing everything for us to admit it. I didn't respond. Some bridges, once burned, illuminate the path forward. On a crisp autumn evening, I stood in my Terralogix office, now expanded to include a small team of brilliant developers who knew their worth and weren't afraid to claim it. On my desk, framed alongside my degrees and awards, sat 2 items: the photo of that $900 check and Sarah Cia's email printed on premium paper. One reminded me where I'd been. The other reminded me why the journey mattered. Linda called as I was packing up for the day. Did you see the Harvard Business Review article? Which one? The $900 disaster. A case study in catastrophic talent management. They're using Vericsson as a cautionary tale in MBA programs now. I smiled, thinking of future executives learning about the cost of undervaluing their people. Maybe some of them would remember the lesson when it mattered. Dinner tomorrow, Linda asked. My treat, though I suppose you can afford your own celebrations now. I could always afford my own celebrations, I replied. I just know what they're worth now. As I drove home through Austin's evening traffic, I thought about the journey from that humiliating December afternoon to this moment. They'd tried to reduce me to a number $900. Instead, they'd taught me the most valuable lesson of my career. Never let anyone else define your worth. The market will pay what you demand, but only if you demand it. My phone buzzed with another speaking request, another consulting offer, another opportunity to share the story. But tonight, I had code to review, innovations to build, and a future to create on my own terms. The check for $900, I never cashed it. It hangs in my office now, under a simple placard. The most expensive mistake they ever made. Because in the end, that's what undervaluing talent costs: not just money, but everything you could have built together. Vericsson learned that lesson too late. But you don't have to. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're tuning in from. Drop a comment below and let's connect. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts. Have you ever felt undervalued at work? How did you handle it? Let's discuss in the comments. Your support means everything, and I can't wait to share more stories with you.